And he resigns, actually. Wow, he thought I did have free moves enabled. Whew. That might have been the hardest speedrun game I've ever played. And admittedly, I played badly. I mean, I played badly in the stretch where I assumed the game was basically over. All right, welcome, welcome everybody watching on YouTube. So let's start a new game, clean slate. We have white this time. So let's start with e4, e5. Taking me a second to remember what I actually play in the speedrun. I play the Gleck. It actually, again, we're facing d6. So this has been one of the biggest surprises for me is how often we face the move d6 in the speedrun. I mean, I don't think we faced knight c6, maybe once. And I'm not going to keep repeating, the same stuff game in and game out. That's why I really, really recommend that you watch the speedrun games in sequence, because some things I'm not going to repeat, such as the fact that bishop c4 is a great alternative and a very flexible alternative to the move d4. Okay, so knight c6, and the thing to understand about bishop c4, it's not that we won't play d4. In fact, we will play d4 against a lot of black's responses. It's just a good way to test the waters and kind of see what setup black is aiming for. Against knight c6, it's a great idea to now play d4 and try to initiate a trade in the center. Knight a5. Now, you shouldn't laugh this move out of the room because it is an idea in certain openings to play knight a5 at a weird time. And I'll show you some examples. Now, how should we respond to this? Well, I think probably some of you are thinking, well, let's just drop the bishop back, bishop b2 or bishop d3, and those are totally normal moves. But we can actually try to maximize our advantage here with kind of a clever tactical operation. What kind of alarm bells should start ringing the moment a knight lands on a5 or h5? And I've said this before. Of course, the knight can be trapped most easily when it's on the side of the board because it is most limited in its mobility. And the stereotypical way of trapping the knight is to play b4 at the right moment. Now, in order for b4 to be effective, yes, that was an intentional pun, you have to make sure that the knight doesn't have any retreating squares. Now, right now, the bishop is hanging. But if it weren't hanging, the knight's only retreat square is c6. Do you see where I'm going with this? What we can do is play a move that looks pretty useless, but in fact, springs kind of a deep trap, assuming that our opponent blocks the check with c6. Exactly. We start with a check. Now, at this level, I wouldn't be surprised. Actually, I would be surprised c6 happens. And now we can park the bishop on d3. And of course, we're hoping that our opponent takes on d4, in which case our trap will work like a charm. But it's not just a trap. Okay, it's worked like a charm, but it's not just a trap, because even if black were to defend against b4, which, by the way, is not that easy to do. Like, how do you actually stop this move? If black were to play a move like b5, the secondary idea is that we're hitting the e5 pawn twice. So I actually think this idea wins a pawn. And now, of course, it wins a piece because we can go b4. And the knight is trapped. So here you see the importance of basic tactical pattern recognition. When you're aware of very typical ideas, you're able to develop these tactical sequences that may seem to come out of the blue, but in fact, they don't come out of the blue because they're undergirded by usually a pretty typical tactical pattern. And it takes some creativity to add the flair, right? To set this idea up, you have to realize I can actually give a check, provoke this move, and drop the bishop back. That's actually the hard part. But if you're not aware of these patterns, it's really, really hard to find ideas like these. Now, black can actually defend this. I think black can put up a fight, but it would take like a really, really high level to figure out the right idea. Our opponent takes on d4, which is reasonable. He's trying to get the most number of pawns for the piece. But you should remember that when almost all the pieces are still on the board, you shouldn't think of the position as, and I see this mistake very often repeated by players, who think in their minds, oh, okay, great, now I'm up a pawn. And I'm like, well, why are you up a pawn? Well, I have a piece for 2 pawns, and a piece is worth 3 pawns. Black has 2 pawns for the piece, therefore we're up a pawn. It's not the same thing, right? Being up a piece here, we are already winning, or very close to winning. If you were up a pawn in this position, you would be like better or clearly better. You can't simply assess the material value of that extra piece, because when there are all the pieces on the board, the value of an extra piece is often much, much greater than just 3 pawns. And it's also not just 3 pawns, it's what kind of pawns black has. One of the pawns is an extremely weak pawn on d4. Black is also super underdeveloped, and we are very likely to crash through in the center before black is able to castle kingside. So how should we block the check? I think a lot of you are probably tempted to go bishop d2 because it's a tempo move, but it's actually very awkward to put the bishop on d2 because, yeah, it's a tempo move, congrats, but where's the knight going to go, right? The knight will then have to be developed to a3, or you'll have to make another bishop move. So a much more harmonious way to block the check is actually with the knight, so that the bishop can be fianchettoed, so that you can apply more pressure on the d4 pawn. And you might be thinking, well, what if black just goes c5 at some point? Why am I making such a big deal out of how weak this pawn is? c5 is itself an extremely weakening move because it creates weaknesses all across the queen side, and it opens up the possibility of a nasty little check on b5, which we've already delivered once. So now it's a good idea to castle, just get the king out of the center, top priority. And of course, like black, okay, there goes c5. And now it's time for decisive action in the center and on the queen side. There's many ways that we could prosecute the initiative here. There are many good moves in this position, to my eye, of course. It's hard to play like a computer here, but you basically want to play reasonable moves that build up the initiative. What are some examples of reasonable moves that build up the initiative? Well, knight c4, I think, is the move that jumps out at me. It hits the queen. It maybe sets up e5. It opens up the bishop. Now that black has already played c5, it is no longer necessary to fianchetto the bishop because the whole point was to provoke this move. Black has played it anyway, so now it's a better idea, if possible, to develop the bishop perhaps to f4 in order to prepare e5. e5, by the way, is a move that we could play right here and right now. We could play e5 straight away. Black takes on e5, and there's a million ways that we could recover the pawn. We could play knight c4 in that position and then take on e5, and black's position will crumble very quickly. So I'm going to do this in the more straightforward manner. We're going to start with knight c4. The queen is likely going to drop back either to c7 or to d8. And then we're going to play e5 and open up the center. Alternatively, we could play bishop f4 and prepare e5 one more time. But really, no need for further preparation. Let's go. Let's go e5 before black has a chance to castle kingside. If black castles queenside, that might be the lesser evil, but with the semi-open b-file, it's pretty clear that we will have ample attacking possibilities. Remember that in these situations, you're usually not trying to seek out a trade of pieces. But if a trade knocks on your door, then oftentimes you're not against simplification, which motivates our next move, which is knight takes e5. Now, some people actually, wait, forget everything I just said. I was thinking queen takes e5, we can recapture. But in reality, queen takes e5, we had the move rook to e1, simply winning the queen. But even recapturing would have been completely winning. So let's take the bishop and let's deliver a check on e1. And now we basically force the king to move. So we start with the rook e1 check. That's kind of an automatic move I play without too much calculation. Now another automatic move. Let's go h3 to chase away the knight so that we don't have any problems with bishop h2. One thing to remember, actually, bishop h2 check can be a very nasty tactical move that catches people off guard. And so one thing you want to make sure of, if our bishop was not on d3 but on f1, h3 would be a losing blunder. It would blunder mate in 2. Bishop h2 check would force the king to the corner, and then knight takes f2 check would be mate. But in this case, we can slide the king the other way, king to f1, and there's no further continuation. Knight to h2 is totally innocuous, and we have various ways of responding to this move. One thing to remember is that often when this move is played, there's a rook on f1. So you're basically forced to take the knight or move the rook. Here, there is no threat that this move poses. And the knight on h2 is simply trapped. It has turned itself into prison. So the only way out of prison is to take on f3. So we just move this knight. And then the knight on h2 is going to be forever trapped. It's not bothering us in any way. It has no attacking potential. It's literally going to be picked off in a matter of several moves. So where do we want to put this knight? Well, there's a couple of good squares. I like knight g5 because it's the most direct attacking move. And then it can slide back to e4. If you wanted to play like a Russian schoolboy, you could go knight to d2, kind of Benoni style, circling around to c4, and preventing black from playing c4 as well. But that's too fancy for the purposes of what we're trying to do. So let's go knight e4. We could also go queen h5. But again, I mean, gratuitous tactics are unnecessary. Actually, queen h5 is kind of cool. Because g6, we might have some fireworks that we could... Yeah, I mean, actually, queen h5 is much simpler on second thought. Let's start with queen h5. And if black plays g6, I mean, at this point, you should be well-versed enough in kind of basic attacking techniques to have a clear intuition of what we would do in response to g6. And I think there are several moves that are broadly part of the same idea that lead to a decisive attack against black's king. If black plays g6, which they do. Okay, so I'm talking in particular about two moves. The straightforward sacrifice that we're going to play is bishop takes g6. But there is perhaps a fancier type of move that has the same general theme, which is actually knight to e6 check, which maybe you don't see. F takes e6, and then the bishop comes out, takes on h6, and sends the king on a little walk. I'm trying to calculate which is the more accurate move, because there's more to this position than meets the eye. But not much more than meets the eye. Let's go bishop takes g6. Straightforward. A little calculation doesn't hurt here. F takes g6, knight e6 check is not the end of the story. This is what I meant. Why? Because if the king moves up to f7, you get a situation where both queens are hanging. Remember, fg attacks the queen. So we play knight e6 check. That's great. But after king f7, which is the only move, by the way, king stepping onto the e-file would walk into a discovered check. Here, we have to go through a checklist. So when you have a situation where both queens are hanging, the best type of move is moving your queen away with check. So you might say, well, queen f3 fits the bill, but there's a knight on h2. Let's not forget about that knight. If you don't have a good check, a second type of good move is to move our queen away and to set up a devastating threat. That's the next best thing. And there is a way to do that. And as many of you are pointing out, it's queen to d5. This sets up what should be pretty clear is a totally devastating discovery. The king is wide open. We've got tons of pieces surrounding it. There is no way black is ever getting out of this, as long as we're accurate. There's probably going to be checkmate in a couple moves here. Or we can win black's queen. One or the other. Queen c6, we have a double check. Knight d8 or knight g5 leads to checkmate. You should be familiar with the concept of a double check. If you're not, you should look it up if you're a newer player watching the speedrun. I'm not going to go through basic definitions. You can definitely do that due diligence on your own. Okay, now we have checkmate in two. We can do it two different ways. The kind of stereotypical setup move is knight g5. This is very common theme, double check, and then queen slides into f7 with checkmate. So a pretty simple attack, but there were some interesting moments. Okay, let's quickly go through the key moments in that game, and I'm trying to open up in 1 second. I'm just seeing if this is... Yeah, okay, so this is an analysis board. And yet again, we faced the Philidor. I don't think we've ever faced the move knight c6 before. I'm going to pull up chess base, so just bear with me for 30 seconds. So knight c6, okay, we decided on d4. And the simple logic of this move is that if black trades everything on d4, our queen is essentially invulnerable. Because as you should know, if you've watched previous speedrun episodes, the move that you should definitely not be afraid of, in fact, you should encourage it, is c5, which is an extremely weakening move. It weakens the pawn, creates an outpost on d5, nothing to fear. A lot of newer players, they go queen f6 in this type of position, just trying to get pieces off the board. You're under no obligation to accept the queen trade. You can go queen d3, and then the black queen on f6 is going to turn out to be a serious liability because our knight can get to d5, or later on we could attack down the f-file. This is fantastic position for white. So for that reason, we like d4. If black plays bishop g4 here, which maybe is scary to some people, the easiest way to respond to this move is tactically. We actually can go h3. And if black trades, suddenly it turns out f7 is hanging, and that's a mate threat, so you get the free bishop pair, kind of Morphy style. If black drops the bishop back to h5, many ways that we could respond to this, but the easiest is just to go g4 and then knight c3 with a big development advantage, big space advantage. You don't have to castle kingside in these types of positions. So for example, black goes knight f6. You can actually go d5 here and close the center. Because black's pieces are so cramped that you can actually use these pawns to your advantage and try to quickly set them in motion and target some of black's vulnerable kingside pieces. The black pieces are stumbling over each other. Like knight e7, look at this. The bishop can't get out. All you need to do is remember to defend this pawn with a move like queen e2, and then you can develop with bishop g5, you can play h4, and you can actually castle queenside when the time is right. Can you castle kingside? Are you going to get mated if you castle kingside? No, you're not going to get mated, right? So let's say black plays something like h6. You can absolutely castle kingside here. Nothing's going to happen to you, because if black plays h5 and tries to open up the kingside, you can just go g5 and then plug the hole with h4. But still, if you have options, it's a good idea to go queenside here. Anyways, I don't want to get too bogged down here. Our opponent played knight a5. Now, when is this actually a legitimate idea? Well, it's an idea when it guarantees that you root out the bishop pair. So with colors reversed, you might remember that in the Gleck system, there is a line where black plays bishop c5 and d6, also known as the main line. And a lot of top players here go a5. And you might wonder why they do that. The reason they do that is because if black instead castles, this is a great time to play this move knight a4. Why is it good? Because we are guaranteeing that we're going to get the bishop pair. The bishop is unable to escape the clutches of our knight, because bishop b4 check, we can chase the bishop around and force it to land on b6. And we can pick it up at our convenience. Also, there are situations such as the Rossolimo, c5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop e5. Believe it or not, in this position, there is the move knight a5. Is this a great move? No, but is this like a legitimate sideline that contains some venom? Yes, it's been played by quite a few GMs. And believe it or not, I actually faced it myself several years ago in a game that did not make the database, but 2300 played it against me. And the idea is just to kind of pull the chair out from under the bishop. So like if white, I don't know, castles, the point is you go a6, and now the bishop has to drop all the way back, and black is quite a bit worse. The point is to kind of transition the game into something resembling a Powelson or Taimanov Sicilian if white plays d4. Like if white plays d4, black gets kind of a mainline open Sicilian style position. So the point is to avoid like Rossolimo structures with bishop takes c6. Okay, so it's not that knight to a5 in principle is always bad. Definitely not. Sometimes like the knight on the rim has a specific role that it plays, and it's fine. One last example in the Fianchetto King's Indian, which of course I play with black. One of the main lines involves playing the move knight to c6. And if you're a King's Indian player, you should know this, whether or not you play the knight c6 line. In response to d5, black's correct square is actually a5, knight a5, hitting the c4 pawn. And the point is, in these positions, black follows up with c5, preventing b4, of course, and then basically quickly prepares the Benko Gambit style idea b7, b5. And the knight directly contributes to that by putting pressure on the c4 pawn. In the fried liver, last example. In the fried liver, as someone is pointing out in my chat, in this position, of course, you're not supposed to take here, traditionally because of knight f7, but nowadays d4 is also considered very good. So you're supposed to go knight a5. And although you don't guarantee the bishop pair, you force this bishop to move out of the way. And most of you people watching should at least have seen this position if you don't play it. So that's kind of a little summary. But one position in which you shouldn't play knight a5 is this one. For many reasons. This actually doesn't really do anything here. Even if we drop our bishop back, it's sort of a waste of time. But bishop e5 check is a very accurate response because black is in trouble here. c6, I think, is the greater of two evils. I think black should have gone bishop d7 and given up a pawn. And in reality, if we play bishop takes d7 and d takes e5, the computer indicates that after knight c6, black is actually not that much worse. Black is worse, but black has some compensation for the pawn in the form of quick development. Oh, it's funny. According to the computer, see, you would never guess that. I would never guess this. According to the computer, the best move is to take on d7 and then just to castle, ignoring the pawn on e5 and prioritizing instead our development. And black will probably drop the knight back. And here you just get like a super, super comfortable. It's almost a position that could occur out of the Ruy Lopez Steinitz variation, if you know what I'm talking about. Except white has several extra tempi and black is ultra, ultra cramped. So c6, bishop d3, black is lost, or virtually lost. Yeah, the best move here is the pathetic b6, and I'm not even going to talk about this move here. We definitely could take the pawn, and black is, I mean, at a title player level, this is almost resignable. Our opponent ended up allowing b4, and the rest was fairly straightforward. I think I explained everything during the game. Yeah, so c5 is further cooperating with us because it's a move we wanted to provoke. Black should have gone bishop e7, but I suppose here we could go knight b3 and simply win the pawn. So the position is completely lost. We open up the center with e5. And one thing I wanted to show you, we could have played e5 in this position and simply interposed the move order. Also notice that queen c3 would just lose the queen. Bishop d2 literally traps the queen. Very important detail. But even if we don't play knight, let's say you don't have the move knight c4, you could also play a move like rook e1. You could even play a move like h3, getting rid of the pin. And this pawn on e5, I think this should be intuitive to you, cannot be maintained. And even if we can't win the pawn back, for example, in response to bishop takes f3, you can take back with a queen. Technically, material is equal, but black is completely lost because his position is just crumbling. The light squares are weak. This is hanging. Black is not developed. The point is our extra piece is so much stronger in most middle games than the 3 pawns. Are there exceptions? Absolutely. I mean, there are situations where in a middle game, with queens on the board, you can sack a piece for several pawns, and it turns out that the pawns outweigh the piece. But it has to be like a concrete justification, like the pawns are very far advanced, or the pieces are poorly coordinated. One game I lost that made a pretty big impression on me that's a good illustration of this is, I think, an example I think you'll like. It's kind of a cool little easy example, and it's an extreme example, but still, I think it's a good illustration of pawns being superior than the piece. Here it is. This is a game that I played in 2009. And my opponent was like a little older, and he'd offered me a draw earlier in this middle game where I was worse. I should have taken the draw. I didn't take the draw. And in this position, I thought I was doing fine. My last move was rook a b8, stopping bishop b4. So my opponent goes rook a d1. And without thinking much, I just assumed that he was trying to solidify his center, and I decided, all right, I'm going to call your bluff, my old man, and I played rook takes b2. But turns out he was not bluffing. Can anybody spot the dastardly combination that he was setting up with his previous move? It's easy, but still. Okay, yeah, very good. Bishop takes c7, the piece sack, and d6. And these pawns are completely overwhelming, but my opponent finds a nice follow-up combination. So queen c8, d7. Queen c7, okay, still I'm hoping I can stabilize the situation. And now, boom. Sacrificing, not the queen technically. I mean, technically it's a queen sack, but it's actually a pawn sack. Why does he do that? Because now he gets the other pawn to c7. Why does he do that? Well, white to move and finish off the game in style. There's actually an easy blunder here that you could make. There's a tempting move that's wrong, which is rook d1. Trying to go rook d8. Black can play bishop f6 and protect the square. It's not that. It's actually bishop knight g5. And black is overwhelmed. I played rook c2. He simply took on c2, actually, and then played rook b1. And now I cannot stop rook b8. That's it. That was the game. And that's an example of the pawns overwhelming the pieces. Let's go back to our speedrun game and finish the analysis. Yeah, not much to say other than afterward queen takes e5, we had rook e1, we traded. I mean, the rest of our moves were very, very straightforward. And here, it was like a nice little combination to finish off the game. The other move was knight e6 check, and then bishop takes h6. And I don't really want to analyze this, but you can do that on your own. But white is definitely winning here. So one winning line involves giving another check, and then giving another check using both sides of the board, and pushing the king onto the 8th rank so that we can take this rook. So that would be a forced win as well. But we played the thematic bishop g6, clearing the square for the knight, and then setting up the decisive discovery with queen d5. In response to queen c6, yeah, we have this check. And it's very important that this is a double check. Any questions, folks, before we move on to the next game? Okay, let's do one more 10-minute game, and then we'll see if we have time for a 5-minute game. Unless there are some questions. Yes, looks like everything is clear. GG, let's take a black game here. E4. Okay, so c5. I almost played e5. Okay, so we're still at the rating where we face mostly the Bowdler attack and its various variations on a theme. We faced this before many times, so let's start with knight c6. Queen f3, of course, is really the amateur move, and it's played against us. Now, at this level, I think people shouldn't play this. Now, you might recall that while the automatic move is e6 or knight f6, we have a way to maximize our advantage, really maximize our advantage with knight to e5. Now, this isn't really a fork because white doesn't lose the bishop, but we grab the bishop pair early and we force the queen onto a super vulnerable square. And now we can follow up by quickly expanding in the center and trying to put our uncontested light-squared bishop to good use. Now, there's several ways that we could follow up here. Maybe your instinct is to go d6, but in fact, I really like the move e6 for two reasons. First of all, it prepares d5, although we're not going to actually play d5 here because, well, we need to develop our pieces. It's not really wise to open up the center just for the sake of it. We could do that later. The second thing to realize is this bishop is going to be fianchettoed when the time is right. So we don't need to worry about our bishop getting stuck behind the pawns. Okay, now again, how should I phrase this? The price of a move is not very high here. It actually doesn't really matter in what order you do things and even what move you make, as long as you're kind of moving toward the goal. There is, however, one tactical detail that you should remember, and maybe I'll get a chance to carry it out. Let's go knight f6. And the detail is perfect. I got a chance to carry it out. e5 is played. Does anybody know what's a nifty little device that allows us to counteract white's dark square control? So, of course, like the simple move is knight d5, and there's nothing wrong with it. But we can also play the move d5. And of course, what you should notice is that in response to a queen check on this diagonal, we can either block with a bishop, or in the case of queen b5 check, we can drop our knight back to d7. In the Bowdler attack, this idea is used in one other position, and I'll show you which one it is. We could technically even play queen d7, but why would we trade queens with such an overwhelming advantage in the center and a lead in development? No reason to do that. d3. So what jumps out at me when I see this move is, first of all, that the evacuation route for white's queen is closed off. So we should make a mental note to start looking for ways either to trap the queen or more likely to use the vulnerability of the queen to make serious gains on the queen side. And if white is not cautious, then to trap the queen. So many ways that we could try to do that. I do see a way to potentially trap the queen, but it's kind of a cheap sequence that doesn't really advance our position, and we don't want to do that in the speedrun. Let's play straightforwardly. How do we use the weakness of the queen to gain space and control over squares? Well, simple. We go a6, we chase the queen away, and then we go b5. And this fulfills two goals. The first is that obviously we're building up a very impressive pawn mass, and the second is that we are preparing to fianchetto our bishop on this really lovely long diagonal. Okay, c4. Our opponent signals to us that they're not willing just to sit passively as we have all the fun. But here we need to use some tactics, right? The best way to respond to a move like this is tactically, although you could also respond positionally and avoid tactics. If you wanted to avoid any tactics or any calculation, the easiest moves to make here would be to take with a d-pawn and then to push b4, locking up the queen side and opening up the long diagonal for our bishop. If you're willing to use sort of a minimal amount of tactics to optimize your response, it turns out you can actually go bishop b7 straight away. And this isn't even a sacrifice. This is not even a sacrifice. Now, here's the interesting thing. If you wanted to play kind of Benko Gambit style, you could play a takes b5. And, you know, maybe people watching who are like 1500 plus can intuitively grasp this concept. White plays queen takes b5. The bishop repositions to a6 to put pressure on this weak d3 pawn. And without calculating any further than that, you should be comfortable with the assertion that black is, at the very least, has full compensation for the pawn. More probably, black is better in that position. Black has more than full compensation. But it's not even necessary to do that. We can go queen a5 check, forking the king and the pawn. And what's the important move to calculate? It's calculate. Knight c3, you have to spot d4, winning the knight. Bishop d2, you play queen takes b5. And you might say, well, didn't I just say the queen trade is beneficial to white? Well, the circumstances were totally different then. Several things have changed. First of all, we've gotten some pieces out. And the main thing that's changed is that white now has a huge target on d3 and also an equally attackable target on e5. Both of these targets can in some way be further exploited with the obvious positional move d4, opening up the bishop. Note that you should not play c4 in this position because that simply allows white to play d4. And now the question on the top of your mind should be, okay, do we trade on f3 or do we not trade on f3? And there's pros and cons to both options. Bishop takes f3 is a committal move because you're giving up this monster, but on the other hand, you're fully crippling white's pawn structure. And there is a kind of positional operation here that I think is very instructive. And in a classical game, I would not play bishop takes f3, but in the speedrun, I will. Not because I think it's bad. I think it's probably even the best move. But I just want to show this follow-up move that should be very instructive to you. What does white want? How does white intend to reinforce this pawn? Well, probably white is going to eventually drop this bishop back and put a pawn on f4 to try to shore up this long-term weakness on e5. So there's two ideas here that I like. The kind of standard textbook positional maneuver is knight b6, knight d5. The knight is very nicely placed in the center. But the more spicy move is actually g5, as some of you are indicating. The tactical component here is that the pawn is untouchable because of rook g8. Positionally, we are not preventing f4 technically, but we are taking the sting out of the move f4, ensuring that this weakness on e5 is going to be more permanent. And we can now develop our bishop to g7, completing our development, well, except for castles, and really putting more pressure on this pawn. I have to say white is defending pretty well. Let's include the move h5. I think it's a nice move to include. And actually, do we want to go h4? We can. I don't think it changes the evaluation. But it's a move that we could play whenever we want to play it. There's no rush with the move a4. Let's castle and complete our development. Knight d2. Yeah, I didn't play too accurately with g5. I just wanted to illustrate this concept. I think it's far from the best way to maximize our advantage. Now let's get our king to g6 in order to reinforce this pawn, because probably their knight... Okay, knight b3 is not very good. But in response to knight e4, I wanted to play king g6. Essentially all hands on deck. Now we need to continue improving our position. I'll start with rook fc8, supporting this pawn and freeing up the knight. Since the knight is freed up, we now can move it to a better square on b6. We can continue on to d5, but kind of keeping in mind the specifics of the position, I think there's a much better square on a4 because it still defends c5 and now it attacks b2. You might be asking, are we trying to prepare c4 here? I mean, that looks like a very good move to play. Yes, we are trying to play c4, but it's not as easy to prepare as it seems, because if we play it here, white can play knight takes d4 in return. And then we can play c takes d3, white slides the rook over, and it gets very tactical and concrete, and, you know, I'd be afraid to play a move like that. So in order to prepare c4, a lot of boxes have to be checked. Now, one thing I want to do here is kind of switch our attention from the e5 pawn to preparing c4. So what's the best way to prepare c4? Well, we need to protect the d4 pawn. So the move that comes to mind is rook d8, but rook d8 hangs the c5 pawn. So rook d8, knight takes c5, rook c8, white has b4. So let's start with actually the move bishop f8. First we protect this pawn, then we protect that pawn, then we slide the other rook to c8, and finally I think we'll be ready to play c4. Now here we want to keep this bishop buried as long as possible. We want to buy ourselves time. So that's why I'm going to go g4. Even though, yes, this g4 pawn is weak, first of all, we could slide the king up to f5, but that's not the point. The point is we're making white lose time and trying to keep this bishop out of the game as long as possible. King g2. Now let's go rook d8. And now let's slide the king up to g6. Our opponent playing well. I mean, definitely resisting nicely. Bishop h4. Okay, now let me think for a second. Rook d5 maybe. Centralize. Yeah, bishop f6. Okay, king g3. I think already c4 should work out tactically. Yes, c4 should work. c4 should work because, well, the circumstances have changed slightly. we trade on c4. And if white takes on c4, we take on b2. And there's one major change. Once the king landed on c3, the king and the knight are aligned on the same rank, which means rook takes a3 becomes a serious threat, which means white can't really take this pawn. White loses a piece by force, I think. Unless I'm missing something, which I think I am. Oh my gosh. Takes on d5, takes in king g4, and then f5, bishop f6, and rook h8 mate. Okay, I blundered. Let me try to fix this. Actually, did I blunder? Yeah, maybe I did. But not a blunder I'm embarrassed about in the slightest. Let's change our plans a little bit. Let's take. And I messed it up, but we're still should be okay here. Let's go bishop c. Let's go bishop c5 and hit the knight. And let's see what happens. Man. Yeah, this is it's a very, very underrated 1200. Let's go here and hit the knight again. Maybe it's a speedrun account. You never know. I'm trying to get him to go knight d6. That would be a blunder. And it would be a very instructive blunder, knight d6 here. Hopefully, we'll be able to demonstrate why. But we'll see. Okay, he sees it. Now let's take. I have a minute on my clock, so I'm not going to be as vocal. Let's go knight d3. Yeah, knight d3. I'm also trying not to get mated here because there's like various tactical concepts. So I'm hitting f2. Okay, black should not be worse here because I have a big attack. But man, this took an unexpected turn. And maybe it's Bogdan Daniel Datch. f3. Okay, but now I go here and hit this pawn. Okay, white is in trouble, I think. I mean, bishop g5 blunders a fork. Bishop g3, we had knight takes e5 check. Sexy little move. Rook t1 is fantastic defensive resource. Or is it? Takes king g3, check, king g2. Wow. And he holds. What if we take with the knight, though? Yeah, knight takes f4. I think this is big trouble for white. But maybe he can go king g3 and hold on for dear life. Okay, check. Here, maybe we can go. I'm going to play for a win here. Bishop d4, which I probably shouldn't. Probably I should make a draw, but I'm not used to be on the defensive. Rook g1 he doesn't have. Okay, so now actually white is on the defensive. I don't see a move for white. Bishop e5 is coming. Bishop b5 is coming. Rook g1 is protected. Okay, I should win this. I have 38 seconds. I mean, I need to be very fast, but I think I can take this game. Okay, takes. Just have to make sure that I don't miss a fork. Yeah, I apologize for people watching on YouTube. I was not expecting this stiff of a resistance, so I took some liberties with my moves, which I will admit to try to show some instructive themes that are actually good in other positions. I mean, rook a5, rook b4 maybe. I mean, basically I'm trying to harass this knight to oblivion. I will trade if he offers a trade, I will trade the bishop for the knight just because I don't have any time. One life pro tip for people trying to improve their bullet skills is in bullet, in the vast majority of situations, knights are better than bishops because inherently knight forks and knights are trickier pieces. So knight forks are easier to miss. And knights are easier to maneuver with unless you maneuver incorrectly. So he goes here. Now the knight is trapped, so I can actually use my king here. I need to play fast, though. And I don't have pre-moves enabled, so I might flag. Okay, let's trade. Got to be super focused here, folks. I'm going to be silent for a while, try to win this game. But it's going to be hard because he is playing like, I don't know, 2,600 or so. Chess.com rating. Okay, but he's actually not playing perfectly. Yeah, I don't have pre-moves enabled. I didn't know I'd need them. Yeah, but how do I enable pre-moves in the settings? I don't know where they are. Are they under the play tab? Does anybody know? So that I don't waste time trying to find it. Yeah, but settings and then what? Settings, play and live. Okay, play. Pre-moves. I don't see it. Oh, It's not there. I lost 5 seconds of this. It's not here, folks. Okay. Quiet, everybody. Let's try. I can do this. We believe. What the heck is this guy? I've never seen anything like this. Okay, I should be winning now. Or no, I'm not. Actually, wait. No, I am. I am winning. Okay, now I'm at least going to draw, which is good. At least I'm going to draw. And he resigns, actually. Wow, he thought I did have free moves enabled. Whew. That might have been the hardest speedrun game I've ever played. And admittedly, I played badly. I mean, I played badly in the stretch where I assumed the game was basically over. So we can check the engine to see my big mistakes. There were, I'm sure, a lot of them. But again, I mean, it's not that I deliberately play worse at this level, just for people to understand. I do play at what I hope is a GM level. But sometimes I'll take shortcuts or I'll make a move that I think is more instructive because I'm just not expecting like a certain level of resistance. So I mean, I wouldn't jump to conclusions. Our opponent seems to be fairly rated. I mean, has played 3,000 games. I mean, I'm shocked, but who knows? Maybe, I don't know. Again, I wouldn't jump to conclusions, but definitely abnormally good defense for a 1200. But we'll take a look. I'm not trying to insinuate anything. I just being honest here. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, and I think a certain someone in Geneva just his ears perked up. Okay, so the start of the game did not portend any kind of difficulty, especially after move 3. We thought this was going to be a pretty easy one. Now remember, I just want to jump ahead here for a second and tell you guys where else you see this trick of flank d5. If white plays the main, quote-unquote, main line, which is knight f3, now let me just remember, e6 is what I recommend. Typically white castles, I go knight f6, and here white has this move e5, and again, you should remember that d5 is the main line. Exactly the same idea. Here white can, of course, take the knight because there's not a queen on c4, there's a bishop, but here black is still better because this is a great example of doubled pawns being actually a good thing. The c4 pawn is clamping down and preventing white from easily opening up the bishop. Because to do that, white has to accept a huge weakness on d3. Does anybody remember what the correct move is in response to rook to e1? In response to knight c3, we can go d5, by the way. But in response to rook e1, does anybody remember what is... Yes, very good. Knight takes e4 is the most precise. Rook e4, d5, the center counter trick. Center fork trick. And white has to give the bishop up. The bishop pair, I should say. And basically the point is, again, you fianchetto your light-scored bishop in this type of position. That is the right place for it. Okay, so queen f3, knight e5, and here the theory ends. Yeah, trade, e6. Okay, so e6 is reasonable. Knight f3, knight f6. Good stuff here by... I think I played pretty accurately. e5 and d5. Of course, there's nothing wrong with knight d5, also good. But I think d5 is kind of a nifty little operation. After queen b5 is clearly a mistake. White should go back. After a6, b5, I thought, okay, this game is going to end pretty quickly. But white plays c4. And yeah, bishop b7, I think, is a nice little semi-tactical move. Our opponent plays c takes b5. And actually, the top computer move is a takes b5. Queen takes b5, bishop a6, queen b3. And here we have a very powerful follow-up move. Does anybody have any ideas here for how we can get the most out of this initiative? Like, how do we get the most out of this bishop? Yeah, so c4 is correct. And, the positionally minded might say, well, I don't really get it. Aren't we giving up aren't we helping white eradicate this weakness? Well, yes, but remember, you can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs. So although you're getting rid of the weakness, you're also keeping the king stranded in the center, and everybody should see that the knight is going to head to d3, and it's going to be a disaster for white. Complete disaster for white. Like, for example, queen d1, knight c5 is already +5 because knight d3 is unstoppable and white is busted. a2 is not, it's like you win the lottery ticket, and you win the lottery and you're walking to cash it in, and the passerby is like, I'll exchange you that ticket for $3. Great deal. That's a McChicken sandwich, probably in like 1980. And so you take on a2. You got to keep your priorities straight. Nothing wrong with cashing in a tactical advantage, but not for a pawn. But instead, we played more straightforwardly. Queen a5 check, bishop d2, and we get this endgame, which is extremely bad for white. And d4. Logical move, opening up the bishop. Bishop f4. And I actually think bishop takes f3 is maybe a little bit worse than the alternative, which was to get the knight to d5, but not by much. Bishop f3 gf. But here I actually think g5. No, it's the top engine move, g5. I just wanted to show this concept of slicing away the possibility of your opponent connecting the pawns. There's a instructive training position that I solved a while ago. Let me see if I can find it. That features a similar theme. Let me see if I can remember where to even get it. So this is a training position given to me by Alexander Onishuk, GM. And the point is this. To evaluate the move rook takes c8. And basically, just to save you some time, the real point here is to assess this bishop endgame and to understand, is this white's best attempt at playing for a win? Yes or no? So I'm going to leave this on the board and let you think for a second while I get this right. There we go. So white to play. Does white have any serious winning attempts here? And it's the same exact concept, just applied to a slightly different position. Yes, the answer is yes. You're supposed to trade rooks. And most people got this wrong. I gave this at a camp. Most people were like, let's go king f1. Or they like h3 or something. But in reality, yes, you trade the pieces because you have this brilliant positional move g4. The point is, if you go king f1, if you play like a pedestrian move, black will play f5 and black will hold the draw. Black will then get the king into the center and build a fortress. But this move g4 is brilliant because you're actually opening up a faster route to f4. And although f5 is still possible, it doesn't prevent the king from reaching f4. And what essentially will happen, black is one tempo short. If black could go king g7 at e5, it's a draw. But because white reaches f4 first, white is just going to circle around. Probably bishop c4 is better. Pick up this pawn and be winning in the bishop endgame. If black tries to put the other pawn in f5, again, the black king is one tempo shy of the target square. White reaches e5, and white is dominating. Again, the bishop is going to circle around, and black is going to get ground down. So just off the top of my head, an application of this idea, slicing off the connection between pawns. In the case of our move, it also had Capablanca winter vibes because this is a game I've shown many times across the speedruns. If you're watching this, it'll ring a bell for some of you. Capablanca Winter is sort of a classic game that is Winter-Capablanca, that is used to illustrate how powerful the notion of like imprisoning a piece can be. And it's actually kind of a similar situation. White's bishop is imprisoned on the same square in the same fashion. Here's a very quick refresher for those who need it. If you've seen this, you can fast forward until I've finished showing you this game. I'm not going to show you the full game because it's a little bit off topic, but still. Here it is, Winter-Capablanca, 1919. Very famous game. In this position, Winter plays knight d5, which is a decisive mistake, believe it or not. And it's a decisive mistake because of g5, just intercepting the pin. Now, knight takes g5 is not possible because of the nice knight takes d5. So Winter has to take on f6 and drop back. And now the critical idea, bishop g4, bishop takes f3, and go into the endgame where you're completely winning. Because if you take a closer look at this bishop, it is literally just mathematically never able to get into the game. White is down a piece. That's simple as that. And Capablanca carried out a plan that involved opening up the queen side, which is logical because if you open up the queen side, you're actually going to put your own bishop to good use. And Winter resigned shortly thereafter. You can Google this game and look at it more carefully, but I don't want to get too bogged down. So very similar vibes here. The bishop on g3 has a hard time rejoining society. And for that reason, I thought the hard work was already done. And so I made a couple of sloppy moves. Bishop g7 was sloppy. Apparently, I should have gone h5 right away. And then, according to the computer, I actually should have gone knight b6. And I should have put the bishop on e7. My mistake was to underestimate the power of a knight maneuver to e4, which sort of hits some of these pawn targets. And so the engine believes that I should put my bishop here so that these pawns are preemptively defended. So I played a bunch of like automatic moves. h3, castles, also probably not great. Knight d2, king h7, which is I think is a good move. Knight b3. And okay, black is still comfortably better and almost winning, but suddenly it's not so easy to actually break through. So now I played knight b6, heading for d5 or a4. I'm looking with a computer also to see where I actually let this game slip away. After knight a4, it's still winning. Bishop f8, best move. White plays f4. Aha. Okay, so I should have played tactically. Oh, I had a tactic. So g4 is a huge mistake. After g4, I give away most of my advantage. And why is g4 such a big mistake? The reason is suddenly, after king g2, which is an excellent move, I should say, excellent move, my king is in some trouble, which I experienced during the game. And I experienced this very directly. I could have gotten mated. But because of the open H file, I underestimated that in the long run, black's king is going to get caught in the crossfire once the position opens up. Instead, I had a win, but this is a very hard win. The correct move was c4, which, of course, you are all aware of. The point is, if white plays dc, I saw this, then d3 and bc, and we're winning. But white goes knight d4, right? cd, rook d2, I pointed this out, and I said this was not convincing. But there is a very, very powerful sequence here. You start with h4 to shut out the bishop completely. Now, can anybody spot... This is like a GM level move, and it comes out of nowhere. Like, it just doesn't even look that great, but it wins. It's a sacrifice. It's not... Okay, rook c2, knight takes c2 doesn't work. b4 is decent, but doesn't do all that much. Knight takes b2 is correct. Yeah. And you're like, what? Now bishop takes a3. Suddenly, it turns out that white's pieces are not capable of handling all the tasks that are in front of them because rook d2 walks into the skewer. This is super important. Super important. And it's not actually clear why this is so winning, but the reason this is winning is because white's bishop is uninvolved, and these pawns are going to decide the game. So much so that you can sack one of them and promote the other one. So if white takes b5 and white moves the rook off of the second rank, then you go d2, rook d1, rook c1, rook b1, takes, bishop c1, intercepting white's control over the d1 square. Finally, if white tries to stay on the second rank but not hit d2, still you play bishop b4. This is the cherry on top. Watch this. Bishop b4, rook takes a8. Black to move. Who can spot? Actually, the only winning move. This sequence only works because of this idea. Now, 99% of people would play rook takes a8. After rook d1, white is winning. Black is at a dead end. d2 is also wrong. White plays rook d1. And rook c1 is met with rook a1. White is winning. The correct move is bishop takes other rook. Rook takes c8, d2. And black wins because the pawn can't be stopped. Just shows you how crazy deep the game actually is. Now, here's the thing. The reason that you want to go h4 and push away the bishop, right? You might have, and those of you who are watching this carefully should actually have this question. Why did we need to play h4, bishop h2? How does this actually help this combination? There is a reason for that. And the reason is even crazier. Let's say we do this exact thing, but we don't play h4, bishop h2, right? The reason is impossible to figure out without the engine. Impossible. If we do the same thing, black is better. It's not like it loses. But after rook a2, the line that I just showed you, rook takes c8, d2, white has the move knight takes e6, which is not actually insane if you pause to understand the idea. White is basically saying, okay, I can't stop black from queening, so I'm going to I'm going to collect as many pawns as possible. And if black takes the knight, then I stop the pawn. So black has to promote to a queen. Knight takes g5 check. And it's not super convincing that black is cleanly winning after king g2. Now let's compare this exact same position to the one that would occur with the inclusion of h4, bishop h2. Here you cannot play h4 because white is going to take, so it's too late. In the same exact line, with the inclusion of these moves, white plays knight takes e6, same thing. And here, after d1 queen, knight takes g5, king g7, white plays king g2, and black is winning with the move queen d2. This is actually the idea, believe it or not. And I know it's crazy, but hopefully you've been able to follow this. The point is, we're hitting f2, right? Remember that if white had a bishop on g3, this would be a senseless move. But here, white has no good way to defend this pawn. If the bishop drops back, white gives up f4, and now white is completely losing. And if white defends with the knight, the queen slides to e2, and the knight cannot be protected because f-pawn is pinned. The rook can't participate. White loses at least a piece. So it should be understandable to you positionally that the bishop, of course, is worse on h2, but there's a concrete reason. Why is the bishop worse? Where does it become important, in other words? Only in this line. So why am I showing all this? You're like, wow, how is this instructive? Who cares? Well, it's not instructive inherently. I just want to illustrate how complicated things can get at a high level. So people often ask, what do GMs do for training? And I say, well, they solve puzzles. I'm like, well, I have 600 and I also solve puzzles. Yeah, because it's different puzzles. So my coach could give me this position and say, you have 30 minutes, find the best sequence. And I would have to give basically this idea, but also then illustrate all the sub-variations to show that after rook a2, I have bishop b4, and then to see bishop takes e1. So when GMs talk about solving puzzles for training, they're talking about positions like these. But it's also a puzzle. It's the same concept. Find the best sequence. All right, enough of that. We played g4, and suddenly the game turns around. In the time that I spent preparing c4, white develops massive counterplay. Actually, rook h4, white would have been better, according to the computer, but bishop h4 is also quite decent. Okay, rook to d5, king to g3, best move, c4. At this point, I have no further time to waste. dc, bc, rook c4, knight b2. The position is equal now, as you could probably guess. And here we reach the critical moment, because if I had played rook takes a3, this is what I missed, in my head. White actually plays rook takes rook. Now you could start by taking the knight, it doesn't matter. King takes g4. And if you play e takes d5, you lose because of f5 check. And black either gets mated or loses the bishop and the game. King g7, look at this sequence. Who could believe that black actually can get mated in this endgame? It's all because I opened the h file. So black has to go to h7. White still gives this check. You can block with your bishop. But now the bishop retreats to g5. Still not the end of the story, and shuts down the rook with f6. That's the end of the story. Black loses the bishop and should lose the endgame. Crazily enough, in this position, black has an equalizing move. Can anybody find it? I didn't see this in the game. I didn't see this move. This is honestly awesome. Super fun complications. Yeah, f5 check intermezzo. Forcing en passant, otherwise it's mate. That's a rare situation where en passant is the only move to defend against mate. Now we take the rook. Now white still should give this check, but now we have f7. And this is equal. I've never seen a position like this. White has tripled pawns, but obviously the important pawn is the one on f6. The only move here is king g5, according to the computer, which maintains equality. What is the idea of king g5? Can anybody explain why is white advancing the king? What is white doing? Thanks for the gifted sub. What is white doing? I mean, what is white's next move? White is freeing the h4 bishop. Why is white doing that? People aren't getting it. Bishop g3. Yeah, the point is to play bishop g3 and then infiltrate with the rook. The point is to play bishop g3. So even if black goes here to prevent bishop g3, white still plays bishop g3. And now another intermediate check. And look at this line. Black can go king g8, and the game continues. But if black goes king f8, white simply ignores the bishop and wins the game because the combined force of the rook, the king, and the pawn is too much for black to handle. So, I mean, the lines here are insane. Black has to go to g8. Now white goes f7 check. You can't take the rook because you allow a queen. So black has to go the other way. King g6, threatening rook h8 and f8 queen. Notice that if black gives the check, the other pawn covers. Again, a good instance of doubled pawns being a positive force. So black has bishop e5. You still play f6. Black has to sack the bishop for the pawn, exposing the white king. Now black can deliver a check like this. And finally, the game fizzles out to a draw. Or actually, rook b6 is safer because it forces the king away. And black cannot defend this pawn. And because black cannot defend it, it's a theoretical draw. Rook and knight against rook. If black goes rook b5, obviously the king can go back to f6, and it's a 3-time repetition. Yeah, you're probably like, I am tired. Take me away from this video. But wild complications. Instead, I actually took the rook and played bishop c5, trying to keep the game going. Like I saw any of that, I didn't. And the rest, I'm gonna be merciful, and I won't analyze too much because I was in time pressure. I was just trying to survive. Of course, white is drawing, but f3 was a serious mistake. After f3, rook a4, white starts dropping some pawns, and black gets winning chances again. The way to draw here, most cleanly, would have been rook h3, creating a lateral sort of semi-pin against the knight and trying to force the rook trade. So what a crazy game. Obviously, I did manage to win. What maybe should have been a draw, I mean, you can analyze this on your own. I was in time pressure, so I was just trying to simplify. This is the draw. Of course, white should not lose this with best defense, but rook d4 should not have been allowed. My opponent, actually king e3, rook d4 anyway is winning. No, it's a draw. Takes here. Here, it's a draw. Insane. Because king goes to e6 in time. So actually, king to e3 was very important to prevent this rook d4 idea that pushes white's rook away and allows our king to infiltrate. And now the situation becomes harder to handle. So my verdict is that our opponent played extremely well in the second part of the game, but I don't think that they were doing something funny. I mean, I wouldn't conclude that at all. I think I made some sloppy moves, and at the right moment, our opponent defended extremely well. But really, the problem can be traced to g4. This is like actually where I let the win slip. And I don't know. I mean, I've never found it this difficult to beat a 1200, but people are getting good these days. Doesn't matter. I think we should focus on the instructive value of this game. You can make your own conclusions, but I'll take my hat off to my opponent. Yeah, good stuff. Okay, let's do one last 5-minute game. For those of you still watching this video on YouTube, thank you. I hope you're not too fried. I'm really into this. This is going to be an epic episode, so let's finish with an encore. Hopefully we get a simpler game. 5-minute chess. Okay, here we go. 5-minute game, and we'll call it a night. All right, 1800. Remember, our rating is higher, and our blitz rating is higher, so we're going to get a stronger opponent. Our opponent's not moving. All right, let's abort. Just in time, I didn't press abort. Nice. Alapin. It's like I sensed that a move was about to arrive. All right, so we get an Alapin. And here we go, knight f3. Remember that my recommendation is not to play d4, which is the sort of traditional main line, but to follow the recent Alapin Chessable recommendation, which is to play knight f3, and in several cases to not play d4 at all. In some cases, you do play d4. d6 is one of the cases where you don't. So d4 here is the old main line, but there are several newer weapons that have revitalized this line, and one of them is to give this kind of weird-looking check on b5, which may seem completely innocuous. Like, aren't we helping black develop? But there's a very deep idea, several deep ideas that are hidden behind the scenes of this innocuous move. Does anybody know the actual point? What is white's most testing option here? It's not, obviously not to trade bishops, because that's like, well, why are we doing that? There's a really, really amazing tactical idea here. It's to play bishop back to c4. And we're hoping for knight b6. That's the sexy line. The, more boring line is e6, but black plays knight b6. And those of you watching, I don't remember if we've already had a game in this line. I wouldn't be surprised if we have. I think I've shown it before. But also those of you who watch my regular blitz play should have seen me play. Bishop takes f7 check. And now we play knight g5 check. Just kidding. Knight g5 check is the lame continuation, and there's no follow-up. The king just hides on g8, and we have no way to continue the attack. No. We play e6 check. This is a critical move. Bishop takes c6. Now we go knight g5. And here, black needs to know how to proceed in order to avoid a quick catastrophe. King f6. Our opponent's going straight into the mating line. Now we play queen f3 check, sacking another piece. This is really the beautiful sequence, and black goes into it. Now you should know that after bishop f5, black can equalize. Technically, according to the computer, bishop f5 is still equal. But at my level, even, it's almost unplayable. I mean, practically speaking, this is unplayable. Now you have to remember the actual sequence, because if you walk into this and you remember that Naroditsky said this was mate, you're likely not going to remember the correct sequence. You actually need to memorize this. The reason is that most people who go into this with their pants down go d4. That's wrong. d4 is wrong because after king g6, it's dead end. You have no meaningful further checks. You actually need to go h4. You need to drive the pawn up to h5. And the idea should be clear. You're controlling the g6 square. You're controlling the g6 square. And the beautiful sequence is actually after king h6. After king h6, there's checkmate in 3 moves. That's honestly just gorgeous. King g5 is mate in 1. d4 is literally checkmate. So black has to go king h6 to keep the game going. And the point, of course, is that d4 runs into g5. And there, it's actually not easy. I'm not even sure white is winning in that position. In fact, white could even be losing there. Does anybody know, can anybody give me the mating sequence here? And if you're watching on YouTube, you should pause and you should calculate till mate. So this is the concept of not fixating on the king weakness, but understanding that there are other tactical factors at play. And the biggest one is undefended pieces. So you have to make sure when you're going for mate that you're not ignoring other tactical aspects, such as pieces that are undefended, which can be used either to transform the advantage, right, to like cash in your chips. In this case, we've already sacrificed 2 minor pieces, so we're not interested in winning a minor piece. That's not the point. The point is we're simply setting up the mating net. And there happens to be a bishop on e6. Doesn't matter what's on e6. Could be a zebra. g5 is forced. We take on e6, and we deliver checkmate with a pawn. Black went right into the book line. This is in the Chessable course. It's probably elsewhere as well. But getting to demonstrate it in an actual game hits different for sure. So don't thank me or credit me for this. Credit the Ganguly and Kazanjanov, the authors of the course. Yeah, but this is really cool. And this is why the Alapin is an opening that I recommend so heartily, because not only is it positionally sound, and at lower levels, you're able to get big advantages because black just doesn't know what to do and allows you to go d4, right? We've seen that many times. Like black will play this or black will play this, and after d4, you're already better. But even if black knows the main line, or at least a couple moves of it, if you know it deeply, even very, very good players will walk into some really nasty prep. So just to be clear, I won't delve into the intricacies here because it's been 5 hours and it's been a long speed run, but knight c6 is the other big move. And here the newer move is bishop c4. So this is the whole point. You're actually withholding d4 entirely. Now black has e6, in which case you do play d4. And this is one big line. The other big line is the knight stepping back to b6. So here you don't sack. You drop the bishop back to b3. And you can do a little exploring on your own. I'm sure we're going to get this line again in the speed run. But you have to know a lot of stuff if you want to play this. If you want to play this line with white, you have to remember and understand a lot of different variations, because black has c4, which is very sharp. Black can go d5 and go for this line, which is extremely kind of tactical and concrete. One thing to remember here is bishop g4 is a very common mistake. It walks into this classic tactic bishop f7, knight g5. There's another one. So black has c4 in this position, or bishop f5. And if you don't want to study this much theory, you can play the old main line, which is d4. But this doesn't have as much venom. And if black kind of knows a couple basics, black can equalize pretty easily. And it's slightly toothless. If you search Alapin on Chessable, you'll find it very quickly. I'll also link it in the description. They didn't pay me to advertise the course. I literally just recommend stuff that I think is good. And I think this course is phenomenal. One of the best I've encountered for all levels. Obviously, it's a high-level course, but if you want to learn the opening properly, it's a good investment. So d6 was our opponent's move, and we play bishop b5 check. Now, very, very quickly, I don't remember like every move in the course, obviously. In fact, like after knight c6, I often confuse the line. But the correct move here is to castle. So the theme here is that you're not playing d4 until you really need to. So black can play bishop d7, for example, and now it's a good idea to play d4, creating a lot of tension in the center. And if black plays c takes d4, you have this really cool idea to go c4. Right, so this is where, if you learn the course, you'll know all of this. If you don't, there's no way to figure this out. Because this gets very concrete. Knight c7, e takes d6, e takes d6, and you can kind of tell what the idea is. Black is left with this super, super weak backward pawn on d6. And white is better. So this is why I'm going to get on the soapbox for a second. If you're watching this and you're like 15, 1600, even a little less, don't listen to people who tell you should memorize stuff in the opening. BS. You absolutely have, if you want to learn an opening properly, you have to memorize a lot. And you have to drill it into your head until it's memorized. And for some moves, you have to understand the general idea. But too much emphasis is put on people saying, oh, you have to understand the opening more generally. If you understand what the ideas are, you're going to reconstruct the moves. BS in most cases. The most important thing is memorizing the lines that occur most frequently. Of course, should you understand the underlying themes, should you be able to, find a decent move if you forget the line? Of course. But oftentimes you can do that if you understand basic chess principles. Like if you screw up and you play d4 here, nothing terrible is going to happen. But if you do your due diligence, you can win games in the opening. So our opponent played bishop d7. We drop back to c4. And e6 here is, I think, a better move. I won't get into this. You can check the course. Knight b6 walks into this lovely, lovely sequence, e6 check. So here, there's a lot of theory, more than I can possibly talk about at the end of a speedrun video. The major points are that, okay, king takes c6, first of all, is absurd because this... Well, it's not absurd. I mean, almost nobody plays it. But technically, after knight g5, king f6, we've transposed, essentially, to the game continuation. But here you should remember something. There's one difference. In the game, the bishop is on e6. So if black plays king takes g5, there's a different line you have to know. Right? The same thing we did, if you do it again, after h5, king e6, king h6. If you play queen e3, you're going to lose. Because black will g5 and there's nothing on e6. So the fastest mate here is actually queen f7. This is the fastest way to checkmate black. And for example, let's say black goes king h6. Now you go d4, g5, and h4. And you might be like, well, where else do I see a similar concept? It reminds me of the Damiano, right? Knight f3, f6. If you know the refutation, which is knight takes e5, in the old school line where black does this, you get very similar themes, and you get a similar queen mate. So you're supposed to go h4 to prepare h5. It's the same concept. Does anybody know, after h6, just as a little detour, what is the winning move here for white? There's a brilliant idea. Again, not tunnel visioning, but seeing the whole board. Very important. It's bishop takes b7. Deflection, or you win the rook, and you're deflecting the bishop so that the queen can deliver mate. Also good to know, by the way. So back to this line. If black takes with the king, you have to remember the move here is queen, not h4, but queen f7. And then either d4, h4, depending on what black does. So the grandmasters who go into this usually go king g8. This, I think, is black's lesser evil. because after e takes d7, you get a situation. No, actually, no, I'm wrong. Sorry, forget I said anything. Here, black is much worse. I'm confusing this with a different line. Here, black is much worse, although this is pretty popular. And black is much worse because, I mean, the king is weak, and I mean, it should be obvious. Like, white has big positional pluses as well. So this is also bad for black. So as a matter of fact, the best line, according to the computer, is to go into this and then play bishop f5. But this is hard to figure out. And after g4, you win the piece back. Because king takes g5 gets mated in 2 moves. Black has to go e6. And here, one more thing you have to remember. You don't play gf. Because after ef, you're actually much worse. You need to start. Does anybody know what the move is here for white? Again, if you don't know the move, you're going to play gf or you're going to go d4, which is also wrong. The move is knight e4 check, stepping back. The point is to force black's king onto an awkward square, such as e7. Only now do you recover the bishop, and in response to ef, you can actually take this pawn. And the course goes on, and if you're a serious player, this should be like the start of your analysis, but it should be clear to you that white has a phenomenal initiative here. d4 is coming. Black has to be ultra accurate in order to maintain equality. Like, black has to know this move, queen d7, and the game continues. You step back, and then you go d4, and you can do some analyzing on your own if you're curious. Maybe we'll get this again. But black, of course, doesn't know this, and so he goes takes, and we're able to deliver this incredible mate with h6. If I check reference, this actually has happened. It's happened in... there's a Naroditsky game here from Title Tuesday where my opponent went bishop f5. One guy tick on g5, 2023. Okay, it was a Title Tuesday, but still, you are going to face this. And king h6 was played. Queen f4 check, and this is made in 2. King g6, h5. So, yeah, that's it. If the king goes back here, then knight takes c6 is fine. And yeah, there are some games in the database here as well. Yeah, if king e8 or king g8, you play knight takes c6. Alexei Serrano played this with black, but black is worse. Queen e2, maintaining the knight. And black is in trouble. So opening analysis isn't too hard. If you're motivated and you like the opening, it's actually really fun to memorize stuff. This is an important point. So I'm glad we got a chance to demonstrate this. That was a pretty technical analysis, but hopefully it's a good sales pitch for the Alapin. And very important takeaway, if you want to learn an opening well and you're at the intermediate level, don't fool yourself into thinking you can do it all by learning the concepts. You have to sit down and drill stuff in. You have to determine what are the tactical lines in the opening I'm learning. So you have to make that determination yourself. What are the lines I should memorize? Well, the ones that occur most frequently, or the ones that are the most concrete. Like if you sack a piece in one of the lines, that's a clear sign you should memorize the moves. And that's really important. I think it's a misconception. That was an epic speedrun. I hope you enjoy. Thanks to those watching on YouTube. This was a lot. I'm exhausted. I'm gonna head out. It's a long stream. Thanks, guys. See you guys later. Bye. 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 See you guys.